Everyone, and welcome. We are so glad you could join us for today's webinar. My name is Matt, and I'll be your host for today's session. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to log in. While we wait, I have a few quick housekeeping notes to share. First, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the recording along with any additional resources after the session, so keep an eye on your inbox. We also encourage you to engage with us throughout the session. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature at any time. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible during the dedicated Q&A portion at the end. So we'll give everyone a few minutes, and then we'll get started.
John, you have the same exact mustache in your profile pic, but everything's a little grayer.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sort of going for that John Bolton look these days, you know.
There you go.
Something to aspire to.
If you are just joining us, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for an insightful discussion. We have a great session ahead, and we are excited to dive in. We're going to give it about one more minute, and then we will get started.
I've been averaging about 2 nitro cold brews a day since going heads down into the CMMC work.
That's what it takes.
Essential.
All right, I see some more people joining, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, thank you everyone for joining the session. Today's webinar is CMMC Made Practical, End-to-End Requirements, Readiness, and Reality. We're with Mirai and Paramify today, and we're super excited to bring you guys this. To get started, Adam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Adam Glover, I'm a senior director here with Inside Assurance. I lead the CMMC service line. A little bit of background on me. I've been working with CMMC since about 2016, back before it was even called CMMC, when it was just DFAR 7012. So looking forward to digging in and talking with you guys today.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, John Pollock, the practice director of the GRC practice at Marai Security. We are a registered provider organization for CMMC, and we've been in CMMC now about 2 years. I myself have been in this industry now for 42 years. So explains the gray.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. And then last but not least, Jack, care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jack Rumsey. I'm the head of solutions engineering at Paramify. Paramify is an enterprise risk management tool. We do SSPs in the CMMC space and FedRAMP space. And prior to joining, the dark side of the GRC tooling, industry, I was an actual practitioner at a cybersecurity startup, which is really where CMMC was from a practitioner standpoint, was brought to light, in that everyone was asking, because we were a security protection asset, are you CMMC certified? And having to go down the rabbit hole there. Prior to that, got my start in this about 10 years ago as an auditor. So been in the SOC 2 and ISO 27000 world for quite a while as well.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Let's go ahead and discuss what we're going to cover today. So CMMC Made Practical, End-to-End Requirements, Readiness, Reality. We're going to walk you through all the steps today. First, we will start with the end of the Wild West era, and we will hop into CMMC readiness, documentation that holds up, the audit reality, key pitfalls and what auditors prioritize. And then we will end with our key takeaways and then also a Q&A session. So again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll try to respond to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. But with that, we will go ahead and get started.
All right, perfect. So yeah, as Matt sort of alluded to, the Wild West era, as it's being referred to here in the slide anyway, is sort of over, right? You're starting to see a lot of contracts coming out with CMMC language in them. If you're out on SAM.gov perusing, if in your downtime, you will notice that there are more and more of these contracts popping up, and some of them are saying that level 2 certification is required or mandatory. So it's really important to make sure you're staying on top of this and keeping an eye out. And the other kind of key component here is how many people need CMMC. The government's estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 organizations need some level of CMMC support or CMMC compliance. And I don't even know that that's accurate, but that's just what they're estimating. If I had to guess, I think it's probably a little bit higher than that, because they don't really have visibility into subs and subs of subs and how far down the food chain this actually goes. But the point here is that thousands of contractors are unprepared. If there is 100,000, there's less than 700 or something like that certifications that have been issued to date, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you're looking at least 99,000 more that need to get done here in the next couple of years. So this is a huge undertaking for the entire ecosystem, not just not just certain folks.
Yeah, Adam, I do think your numbers are low, because what a lot of folks aren't looking at when they look at CMMC requirements is, where is the subcontractor? If they're within the United States, they're probably within your 100,000 number. But even subcontractors outside the United States in any NATO country are also required to be CMMC compliant. That number could easily balloon to hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. So really, CMMC is the type of thing where people feel it's painful to do. However, from a business standpoint, CMMC is really now becoming a competitive advantage. If you get your CMMC and the government contract comes out requiring it, you're able to bid on those contracts. We're sort of waiting for that point in time where one huge government contractor loses a $200 to $300 million contract because they weren't CMMC compliant, and that hits the news. A lot of people have been waiting to go down the CMMC path, and it's really going to be an event like that that's going to be the landslide that's going to push everybody over. And the funny thing is, these requirements are coming very soon in the October timeframe, that it's going to be mandatory in the contracts. And people are thinking, well, I'll just wait till then and I'll get CMMC compliant. Well, the reality is it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months or more to get an environment ready for CMMC. And really the long pole in the tent there is not so much how long does it take to do the readiness work, how long does it take to create the SSP or go through the audit. The long pole in the tent is, once the gap assessment's been done on your environment, how long does it take to remediate all of those gaps? If you have a really mature environment, it can go really quickly. If you have an environment that has a lot of gaps in it, it's going to take a lot longer. And that's actually some of the hidden cost of CMMC that people aren't prepared for, because while we're saying here there are multiple parts to CMMC with the partner readiness, the generating the SSP with a tool, and then doing your audit, there's the hidden cost of what do you need to do in your environment to satisfy the gaps, and what is going to be the cost to that. Do you use your own resources? Do you go out and contract third-party resources, and it can really start to add up over time.
Yeah, and talking about the whole ecosystem, there's just a wealth of security protection assets that are definitely within the scope of CMMC, that the guidance around what they need to provide to their end customers, a customer shared responsibility matrix, that's been also a very gray. So everybody in the entire ecosystem, whether it's a security protection asset, like a security vendor, or an MSP, also needs to be aware of the timeline for CMMC and what's required.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind too, when we're talking about timeline, is from the assessor standpoint. We talked about how many, hundreds of thousands of people are going to need this potentially. There's only about 95 or so C3POs that can actually do the work. So most C3POs you'll find are booked for the next 6 months, maybe more. So you certainly have to consider that when you're going down your journey as well. So make sure that you're engaging with a C3PO as early as possible. That way you can get on the schedule, get out there, and then keep in mind that the assessment process also takes somewhere in the 6 to 8 week range to get it from the very beginning when you start phase 1 or the pre-assessment phase, all the way until the end when you have your certificate in hand. So this is a lengthy journey, and I think that's what John was trying to portray. So make sure you have a full picture of what all's involved from start to finish.
Yeah. Should we pop to the next? Let's go. Because we're talking timeline. We got the slide for it.
Yeah, and like I said, it does typically take 6 to 12 months to get to full CMMC compliance. Assuming you can get your audit booked, assuming you can get all the gaps remediated in your environment, all of those things are going to be drivers as to how long it's going to take. So if you think you're going to be bidding on a government contract come this fall, and you haven't started yet on CMMC, guess what? I think you're already in trouble.
Yeah, and I think having, being a tool that caters to the space and working with a lot of CMMC advisors, they say about 6 to 8 weeks to just even scope the boundary. So some of this stuff takes a lot of interviews and discussions, and that's not even accounting for the documentation, which is really heavy in these engagements. So yeah, that 6 to 12 month timeline, starting on the prep work immediately is going to get you there, right? And it's still going to be 6 to 12 months out. Let's go forward.
Okay, so a little bit of myth busting here. This is always funny. So we passed the self-assessment, so we're ready. Wonderful. The self-assessment doesn't enforce validation of your evidence. Thus, you can get to your audit and still fail the audit. The other thing is, without fully understanding what is CUI, where it lives throughout your environment, quite often the scoping isn't done well, and there are gaps in the coverage of the overall environment itself. The next one here, tools alone won't make us compliant. I keep hearing this one all the time, and I always get such a chuckle out of it. Someone says, "Oh yeah, we just bought a tool like Paramify. We're all set. We're going." and I have to laugh because I'm going, there are so many pieces to this puzzle that while the tool's important, don't get me wrong, the tool alone won't get you there.
Yeah, we say we're the Iron Man suit, but you still need your Tony Stark. We become advisors really quick as a vendor company, but there's a lot more thinking that goes into this, especially to highlight the scope.
Yeah, exactly. And with CMMC, there's a lot of policies, procedures, system documentation that needs to be created. It's very important that all of this aligns well with the actual controls that you're reporting in your SSP document. My advice would not be to wait to the end to do this documentation. Do it as you're building the systems, as you're in there hands-on getting everything ready. The other myth here, we'll fix the gaps before the audit. Good luck on that. Depending on the amount of gaps you have, and that it could be a pretty heavy lift. If you've booked your auditor already and you have a timeline for that, you better be focusing on getting those gaps done well ahead of the start of that audit. Last thing you want to do is have to rebook your audit. You could get pushed, as Adam said, 6 months out into the future. And then CMMC is just a certification badge. You know, it's funny, we do a lot of SOC 2 and ISO 27000 work as well, and a lot of people look at a SOC 2 as simply a badge. The reality with CMMC, and this is where the government is driving things, and the intent of the whole thing is that you're really designing a secure system and processes to store, transmit, and manage this. I'll call it sensitive data from the government. You know, some of it's not all that sensitive, but there is sensitive data within that, and it's really about the entire ecosystem, the people, the processes, the tools, all coming together, and being able to demonstrate that as you've implemented the controls, that you're actually living those controls.
Yeah, and a couple of things to point out on this slide too. So when you mentioned the self-assessment, there is a certifying official. As you enter that score into SPRS, somebody has to certify that, and you still are being held to a potential False Claims Act if you are not taking the self-assessment seriously and reporting a bad score. Whether you're doing that on purpose or not, it's still very important to take that self-assessment seriously. And then to the point about fixing the gaps right before the audit, I think this is really where the mock assessment becomes extremely important and vital in what we do as a C3PAO. I would say at this point, probably about 90% of our clients are electing to do mock assessments. And it's for that reason. They don't know what they don't know, right? CMMC is brand new. It's brand new for everyone. So everybody's learning as you know, kind of as we go. And the last thing you want to do is dive into an audit or dive into an assessment and potentially fail it for whatever reason. And then you're having to pay the fees all over again. You're having to get back on the schedule. All of that stuff is expensive and time consuming, right? So
Adam,
one of the big things
mock engagement work? How does that, what's like what's the trajectory for mock engagement to real assessment on your side?
You mean like the delta between the two? Like how long does it take to go from mock to validated?
Yeah. When you're scoping that kind of engagement, where would the mock assessment fall? And then when would you schedule the real assessment?
Yeah, so good question. So for the mock assessment, it's treated the exact same way as the validated assessment. We're going through everything we would normally do in phases 1 and 2. The difference is we're not uploading anything into EMAS, and we're not reporting or issuing any type of certification, right? We're just going through the assessment itself. How quickly we can move into the validated or the formal level 2 assessment depends on the results of the gap, or not the gap, of the mock assessment, and how time consuming the remediation steps are. Sure. If the mock goes really well, we can typically move into the validated pretty quickly. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, we schedule about 30 days between the two, just in case it's needed. But then there can be issues to John. I think one of the points John was making earlier, maybe on a prior slide, there can be issues with things that could be fairly time consuming. And one of the biggest things we run into in performing mocks is licensing issues. So if people don't have the correct licensing, They need elevated licensing, whatever it is. As I'm sure you guys are aware, procuring government licenses is a time-consuming process in and of itself. So if you run into issues like that, then you're going to be looking at more than 30 days between the two. But I think where I was going was the last point I wanted to make here is with fixing the gaps and the importance of the mock. With CMMC, it's not like any other framework. It's not like FedRAMP where you can have POAMs and still be certified. That doesn't exist. The only way to get certified is to have a perfect score. You have to have 110 out of 110. And there is such a thing called conditional certification, but it's very narrow in how you can achieve that. So the key thing with CMMC to keep in mind is it's not how many controls you fail, but it's what controls you fail. So we've seen situations, and it's possible where you can have a score of 105 out of 110, fail the assessment outright, start all over, pay all over, all that fun stuff. Or you can have a score of like 92, and you're conditionally certified, you go on a formal POAM, you clear those items, and then in 6 months, you could get your full certification, assuming those items were remediated successfully. So all of these things are really important.
What's the showstopper? Like what in your head, what's the biggest control that you failed that would not get you through?
Really it's SSP, going back to that documentation. That's a mandatory required thing. Now, normally we would see that and we would catch that in phase 1 or the pre-assessment phase. So you wouldn't even get to phase 2 and you wouldn't fail at that point because we would put a hard stop on you at phase 1.
Yeah.
But a lot of things that we're seeing with the documentation is people are writing the SSP to NIST 800-171 or the 110 control statements. But that's not what we're assessing. That's not what CMMC is. We're assessing against the 320 requirement statements, not the 110 controls. The 320 statements roll up into the 110 controls, but your SSP documentation has to address all 320 in some capacity, not just the 110. So I would say that's probably still, I don't know, a year later, that's probably the biggest thing we see.
Yeah. Okay, let's move along here to CMMC readiness. So this is, your boss has come to you, said, we're going to do CMMC, go get it done. Where do I start? And really the starting point is, well, number one, making sure you have a good a partner to work with. I really strongly advise not trying to go your own on this. It's going to cost you time and rework in the end. Really, step one is understanding your scope of your CUI and your environment. We start by looking at where does the CUI live? Where are you getting it from? Where is it residing in your environment? Where is it going to? And when I say where is it going to, it could be going to a subcontractor. It could be going into a paper document that you're producing. That's all within scope. Any of that information being output. If it is going to a third party, to one of your subcontractors, you need to make sure your subcontractor is also then CMMC certified. If you're using a SaaS application in your environment, if the SaaS application is also being sold to the federal government, that SaaS provider needs to be FedRAMP certified. If they're not selling to the federal government, but they're selling to you and you're handling CUI within their environment, they do need to be CMMC certified as well. So understanding the scope of your environment is really, really key. We had a case where I was talking to a manufacturer and he says, well, we get government requirements and we put them down on our CNC machines, but I don't want to touch my CNC machines. I want to keep them out of scope. And I said, well, but you've now put information down there, and these machines, in your operational technology environment are talking to the network. You're putting that information at risk. Those machines need to be in scope. Now, Can there be special handling for assets like that? Yes, but you do need to identify those assets, and you do need to call out that special handling if that is truly the case. So once we get the CUI environment scoped, and really right-sizing that environment is important. Probably one of the leading causes of failure of an audit is the incorrect scoping. So we move from scoping to the gap assessment of your environment. Now, really, there's a choice you need to make at this point. There's two ways you can go. One is you can say, look, we have just a little bit of CUI coming in, it's living in this space, so therefore we're just going to build an enclave. We're going to have that all cordoned off from the rest of the company, and we'll handle the CUI within there. If that's the case, if you're building this environment greenfield, it's the 110 controls or the 321 objectives or 320 objectives that become your requirements for how to build the environment. If the CUI is everywhere in your environment and your whole company needs to be in scope, that's where the gap assessment comes in. We do the gap assessment, find out where you're meeting the requirements, where you're not. From there, we'll build a plan with you on what you need to do to remediate all those gaps. This is where, like I said earlier, the surprise costs come up, and typically this becomes the long pole in the tent in terms of the timeline, is getting all these pieces in place. So once you have all of that, that gap assessment done, that roadmap, we move into control implementation. This is more, we take more of a back seat here. Excuse me, doing it more from an advisory standpoint. We'll guide you through how to implement all of these pieces. We'll guide you through the evidence collection. And I want to also emphasize here the importance of training, because people say, well, we do security awareness training already today. Wonderful. That's not what the government is looking for in this case. This is very specific role-based training on the proper handling of CUI. And it's very important to make sure that anybody that's going to be touching that CUI goes through that training, and that you have it documented, the fact that they've gone through the training. So great, we've now made it through scoping, we've made it through our gap assessment, we've gone through, we've been implementing everything, getting the evidence collected. Now what? Next step is to get the SSP document built. Now, a lot of folks say, you know what? It's a Word document. I'm just going to download the template and do it myself. I really don't advise that. Most laptops out there can barely load the template for it, never mind the full document. And the document itself is tricky, because a control may appear in multiple areas within the document. And if you don't work to keep those controls all properly in sync, where they appear in multiple spots, that becomes a red flag for the auditors. Okay, so using a tool like Paramify to do this cuts your time down from months of creating that document down to likely hours or maybe a week. It greatly reduces it. And if you do find something wrong when you're reviewing it, you simply make the changes, press a button, and it regenerates your document. Makes the whole process a lot easier. I really, for those reasons, don't recommend people going off and doing their own. But I'm going to pass it over here to the Paramify team and let them take you through their side.
Yeah, thanks for the plug, John. That's really the bread and butter of Paramify, is mind mapping the security program. So in CMMC, the CUI boundary and all of the 320 requirements that go into the level 2. So 110 controls, but really in Paramify, you're getting a place to organize each of those control parts in the 110 controls, which when you add up all of the parts, it's really 320 requirements. So how can you do that effectively? Well, it does really go back to the scoping of the CUI assets to start. And then a really big part of this is the security protection assets. So initially, this would be with an advisor, but also in tandem with our tool. You're going in and saying, well, we are on Azure Gov with GCC high, right? Well, you also need to, and you'll probably get a share customer responsibility matrix for both of those vendors, and like what controls do they provide, and what needs to be configured by the end user. So that whole piece, we also try to account for that. Now, scoping the security protection assets that's a huge part of this. So that's going to live in that like CMMC assessment boundary. And that's where Paramify comes in really well, which is mind mapping what those SPAs are and what are their capabilities. What do they do? So a proper SSP from the customers that have gone through this and the advisory firms that we work with is each control part needs to be addressed with its own, you could call it a control narrative. And for instance, in the first control, like limit system access, first control in CMMC 3.1.1, you're talking about your authorized users, the processes that are authorized on behalf of them, the authorized devices, how is access limited, how are those processes or system accounts access limited, and how are devices access limited or restricted. So that's a lot of info in just simply the first control in this. And so going through that, one, we need those security protection assets when we're talking about how do we protect this. Parts A, B, and C in a lot of these controls are asking you to define something. So if you really extrapolate that and go down the list of all 320 requirements, about 100 in this framework tell you to define something. So what would that mean? I mean, that's got to be written down somewhere or very cleanly shown in a system policy. So you have about almost a third of this that inherently is going to be documentation. And so like the SSP is mind mapping all that. And what we like to do is put anything that you have to define is going to point to a documentation wrapper. In CMMC, you got about 14 core policies where a lot of this stuff is defined. And so, yeah, I mean, in a world where we want to go away from screenshots and just endless policies, CMMC is still definitely in that world, and it has to be very specific how you're documenting things. And so that's what Paramify is aiming to provide, is that organizational piece where everything has its place and you can reuse where it makes sense. So a big piece of this is like the SSP and all of access control policy and configuration management policy are huge. That those policies are just so pertinent to these control requirements, and they have to be documented correctly. So when you get into the phase 2, when you get into that validation piece, that's what an auditor looks like. Like that's their rubric of the artifacts that they're going to look at. So any screenshot, any user listing you're going to end up providing in an audit, they're going to be looking at the SSP document and saying, does this match up? And Adam, like, give me your take on that. But that's typically your rubric of going down the assessment is what's in the SSP and how granular did it get, and does it address the entire scope of the CUI boundary?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So as it relates to the assessment, the SSP is pretty much the Bible that you're working off of, right? The SSP ties to every single control, all 320 objectives it ties to. And then when you get into the assessment week or what's phase 2 of the CAP, that's when we're going to start drilling you a little bit on not only is the SSP accurate and does it reflect reality. So in other words, is what you have written down in your SSP, are your systems actually configured that way? But we're also going to be interviewing your personnel to say, hey, are you actually doing these things? And are you doing them this way or not? So if either the documentation or if the artifacts are not lined up with the documentation, or if what the personnel is saying in the interviews is not lined up with the documentation or the artifacts, then you have an issue where that'll likely lead to a control being not met for whatever reason. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's very important.
So yeah, the main organizational items, like if we were just going to take one, like the 3.1.1 example, what you have to prepare for is addressing every part in the control, A through F, the responsible role, to your point. So who can we actually tie this to if we were to do an interview? Who in the organization is responsible for carrying out each part of that? What security protection assets are utilized in the performance of that control? And then also a spot in the SSP where you would be mapping your artifacts. I think that is generally how one of these responses in the SSP looks like. It's just making, and so if you go through that exercise of beforehand, before you're writing response by response and, times that by 320, if you can mind map that a bit and say, well, the identity team is 100% responsible for, let's say, something like Microsoft Entra ID. And we can also mind map that Entra ID in an example boundary is the primary SPA that governs identities for the entire CUI boundary. That's great. Now, that's why it always goes back to the scoping of that boundary, because many SPAs can cover sort of one requirement depending on the area where the CUI lives. But yeah, so organizing it sort of before you go into the exercise of writing it line by line is how we take that, whatever timeline you want to say, like several months of writing it down to a couple weeks. Now you have to, again, though, this is an orchestration and an organization tool. Like a tool alone isn't going to give you the answers on what your security program does. And so that's why, to John's point, working with a partner does speed things up quite a bit, especially in the beginning, optimizing that CUI boundary.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So the audit reality. So kind of what we look at, and I think we've already touched on a lot of these points already, but objective evidence. So this goes back to when you get into phase 2, and when you get into the assessment week, the assessor, the C3PAO, has 3 methods that they use. So examine, interview, and test are the 3 methods that we're required to do. For the most part, we will look to achieve at least 2 of those for all 320 objectives. So going back to the prior slide and what we were talking about there, the documentation is going to be key. So that's going to be what we inspect. And then depending on what the context of the control is, we might ask to see an artifact, we might just interview someone, we might do both. So making sure that everyone is in alignment and everyone's been trained on what to do and how to do it. A classic example I can give of this is background checks. Generally speaking, somebody in HR does some sort of background check. If you have an enclave, if you have CUI in your environment as an OSC, you're likely doing a separate, more detailed background check on those individuals. So if you bring in somebody from HR that we interview and they have no idea what the protocol or procedure or even the why behind why they're doing this enhanced background check for a CMMC person, that's an automatic kind of red flag, right? So those are all things to really keep in mind. Making sure everything is consistent, everyone's on the same page, making sure the frequency of controls is the same as well. So don't put in your documentation that you're doing it weekly if you're really only doing it monthly, or vice versa. Make sure the control frequency is in line with what you're actually performing. One of the big things with CMMC too, and this goes back to maybe a point John made a little earlier about not trying to fix things right before the audit. So one of the things we're going to want to validate is that it is a repeatable process, and you actually have a formal procedure in place for how you're going to address these things. Whether you have any activity or not is not the point, but we're still going to test to see, do you have a repeatable process that we're comfortable with, that we can sign off on to say, if this happened, you would be in okay shape. An example of that would be incident response. Hopefully you don't have an incident. Hopefully you never have an incident. But if one does happen, do you have solid policies and procedures in place that you know exactly what you're going to do and exactly who's going to do it? And can you articulate that to the assessor in a way that makes them feel comfortable with whatever you have in place, right? And then, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to ask you, the hard-hitting, the scary technical stuff, in your opinion, what is the most scrutinized control from like a technical perspective? In my head, I'm thinking about things like DLP configurations for the systems that actually have the CUI. But as an auditor, what do you guys actually have to say? There is absolutely no way we can just interview someone. We need to look at a configuration, and we need to go a level further into those artifacts. So I think about things like FIPS encryption and DLP. What's your kind of top controls where that would be the case?
That's a good question. And I don't know if this would answer your question directly, but I would say one of the things that we've seen fairly frequently actually is, and this ties back into the earlier discussion too about scoping, but a lot of times SPD or security protection data is not classified or treated the appropriate way. So what I mean by that is if you have SPD and say the logs are going to some IT administrator's workstation, that SPD is in scope. If that log data is being sent to that workstation should be in scope. But oftentimes it's not. The OSC will leave it out because they're going to say, well, it's not CUI, it doesn't matter. Well, by the precedence of what the CMMC framework is, SPD is still in scope. So that's still an in-scope asset that you have to account for. Now, does that asset need to comply with all 320 objective statements? No, but it still has to be in scope and it still has to be accounted for. So those are the types of things that we definitely would want to check out. But again, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great context. And that goes back to the inventory of your assets and classifying what is a security protection asset, what data does it hold, and how is it being stored, processed, accessed. And that should be one of the first exercises before you get all the way down the line and say, okay, we haven't scoped this properly.
Yep.
Let's.
I think I went too far. What happened?
Adam, you drive this.
All right.
Okay.
Is it working now? There we go.
This
I don't know why the slides kept bouncing around on me.
What can't you guys do?
So this is a good slide to cover. So CMMC this is another big distinction between CMMC and a lot of other frameworks. So if you're thinking about SOC 2 or even high trust to an extent, some of the other frameworks that are out there, your auditor or your assessor can also do some readiness work. So they can do a gap assessment, they can do a readiness assessment, something like that. The clear distinction with CMMC is we're not allowed to do any of that. And the reason why is we can't provide any sort of recommendations. So in a traditional readiness or gap assessment, you would get recommendations and remediation steps on how to fix it, right? With CMMC, we can't do that. So that's where an RPO partner, that's where a company like Mirai comes in. They help with that, and then we pick it up from there.
Yeah.
So it's really important that assessors remain independent. We also get this question a lot, even during the course of an assessment, where we'll get questions about, can we do this? Can we do that? Should we word it this way? Should we word it that way? Again, we can't tell you what to do or how to do it. We can point you in the right direction. If you ask us a simple yes or no question, we can typically answer that one way or the other, but we can't tell you what to do or how to do it. So really keep that in mind.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Adam, through the assessment process, because there are times where OSCs can get frustrated by that because they don't understand the distinction.
Sure.
I was going to say, Adam, the reverse is true as well. Where during a SOC 2 or an ISO 27000, the readiness partner can be present during the audit. When it comes to CMMC, the readiness partner is not at the table. So it's truly the client with the auditor at that point. So,
what about a mock assessment?
I'll leave that one for you, Adam.
Can a readiness
pretty much
partner
the same. So for a mock assessment, we don't treat it any differently. We want it to be as by the book as possible. So we're going to follow all the same steps and procedures that we would normally do as we're going through phases 1 and 2. And one of the primary reasons for that is if the mock assessment goes really well, we want that evidence to be valid, and we want to be able to rely on that as we're moving forward into the formal assessment. If we're doing things that, again, we can't consult, so it's a little bit nebulous here in this context, but if we're not treating the mock assessment in the same way, then we might be forced to redo the procedures for the validated assessment. So where we can, we want to save the OSC time and effort. So that's really what that boils down to.
Yeah. Could this be a situation where you go through the mock assessment, if gaps were identified, control failures identified, and you said earlier you have like this 30-day, generally about a month time period before you jump into the real thing, could the client come back with those findings, work really hard on remediation, but involve the readiness partner and then, start again for the final assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would likely be what the OSC would do anyway, because when we do a mock assessment, the results that we're going to give you are a simple dashboard of, hey, this control was met, this control was not met. Now, I always tell everyone, and I like to give this context of, if you're paying attention during the assessment, which hopefully you are, but you'll be able to tell based on the questions that we're asking and the way we're asking and what we're asking for, you should be able to tell why that control is not being met. We will not tell you why it's not being met, and we won't put in writing, hey, we recommend you do this to remediate that, right?
Oh, you won't put in writing why though?
At the end and say, 10 controls are not met. They will likely go back to their readiness partner and say, hey, can you help us understand what we're doing wrong here? Why isn't this met? And remediate our gaps.
Wow. So it's simply, you didn't meet it, just no other context. I know you can't do a recommendation, but there's no this is why we observed it wasn't met?
Very little of that. So
Okay.
again, it has, we have to be really careful not to cross that consulting boundary. So
Sure.
generally
Okay.
speaking, it's just a not met, and then we'll give you any context we can give you. Yep.
Hey guys, we have about 10 minutes left. We do want to have a short portion for Q&A, so just wanted to give you guys a heads up.
Well, yeah, I mean, these common pitfalls have been discussed in depth if you're reading down the bullet points. So I think we could go to Q&A.
All right.
Yep.
So again, guys, key takeaways: CMMC is now a contract prerequisite, and readiness typically takes 6 to 12 months. Starting early reduces risk and competitive disadvantage. And finally, documentation must reflect operational reality, and auditors prioritize evidence and repeatability. So we did have a question in here, and guys, anyone watching right now, if you have any questions, now would be the time to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can before we have to end the webinar. But for CMMC Level 2 audit, is there any of mandatory recurring trainings for OSC? That was a question in here.
There is mandatory training on the handling of CUI. You take it ahead of the audit, but here's the reality. A lot of folks think, hey, we got the audit done, we've got our certificate, we're done. The reality is you need to continue to live the controls even after the audit. A lot of companies we work with fall off what I call the post-audit cliff, and controls start to drift out of alignment. And you know, CMMC is the type of thing that's re-audited. It's on a 3-year cycle, but there are check-ins at the end of year 1 and year 2. And if you're not staying compliant, you are going to struggle. And part of that staying compliant is you take the training initially on the proper handling of CUI, but then you have to refresh that training on an annual basis.
Yeah, I mean, there's insider threat, there's role-based access requirements for training, and one that may be often overlooked, and I think, John, you kind of alluded to this a little earlier, but if you have a physical location and scope, so if you're a manufacturing company or doing something with physical CUI, typically there's a physical CUI handling procedure that you have to have associated with that. So it's also critical to make sure you're doing some sort of training surrounding that handling procedure. So if the key there is, if we interview someone during an assessment and say, hey, do you know about this procedure? Are you following it? And they've never read it before, that's kind of a problem and a red flag. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind when it relates to training.
Okay, great. We have another question here from Tom. So are OSCs that are being assessed allowed to record the assessor call using their own Google Meet, for example?
No, I don't think so. We've never been asked that question, but we would typically record the calls on our end. But then as soon as the assessment is over, those calls are purged and removed. So no,
Can
I don't
those be shared to the end client?
It could potentially be shared, yeah. We would have to, we would cross that bridge on a case-by-case basis, but I would say we would also need to be careful doing that because there could be some liability component in there as well. So if we're recording something and, we're making judgments on the fly of, hey, is this trending met? Is this trending not met? We could get caught in a little bit of a pickle there. So I don't know. We would have to take that on a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, I would say no.
Asking the hard-hitting questions today.
Yeah.
Adam.
All right, we have one more question here from Matt. He said, what is your advice to customers to prepare for the eventual level 3 requirements coming in 2027?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, from a tool perspective, right? If you were already well into planning, or you had a level 2, if you had like a level 2 program that was already in place, in a tool like Paramify, you're not going to start from scratch when you click, hey, we're going to go to assess against the level 3 framework. It's all seamless in a GRC platform because the controls are mapped on the back end. So you could start there by really doing the diff compared to what you have in your level 2 environment and the requirements for level 3, and start doing that initial gap assessment on, hey, what's that like last mile that we need for some of these controls? And from an organizational and like a documentation perspective, in a tool like Paramify, that work is all seamless within the tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of these levels build upon one another. Like if you look at the level 1, it's a much smaller subset of controls focused mostly around handling federal contract info. You get into level 2, it's then handling CUI, and it's a much larger set of controls. And level 3 is just going to be that. It's going to be additional levels of additional controls focus more on the I was going to almost said DOD, it's now DOW requirements, but it's just additional controls that you're going to need to pay attention to. I don't know that there's much you can do ahead of time to prepare for that until the actual level 3 requirements are released.
Yeah.
All right.
So as it relates to level 3, the first thing you have to do is achieve level 2 certification with a C3PAO. Level 3 requirements are part of 172, NIST 800 172. It's about 20 additional controls, something like that. And I would also encourage doing a mock assessment with your C3PAO on those level 3 controls as well. To get level 3, after you achieve level 2 with the C3PAO, you have to go through DIBCAC and schedule your level 3 assessment. Sorry, go ahead, Matt. I know you got another question.
Yeah, I think we have time for one last quick question here from Tom. He said, are there examples of primes or DOW accepting self-assessed level 2, or are most of or all contracts requiring level 2 with assessment? And that'll be our last question for today.
You want me to take that first, or does it matter?
Sure, go ahead.
So the big primes are not accepting self-assessed level 2 at all. So the big primes, the Northrop Grumman's, the Boeing's, the Lockheed Martin's, people like that have already released statements that they're expecting their subcontractors to have level 2 certification. Some of the other primes might accept self-assessment for a period of time as we're in this phase-in period. But generally speaking, I think it's about 2% of the DIB will be allowed to do a level 2 self-assessment on an ongoing basis. So it's a really small number. You would need to check with your prime and or your contracting officer to validate that. But generally speaking, I would say no, but possibly for a period of time here as we're phasing in. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts.
I believe it's until October that they're allowing self-assessments, and after October, it's going to be required to be certified.
All right. Thank you guys for answering those questions. That is all the time we have for live questions today. But if you guys do want to reach out to us and have some more questions, you can email us at sales@insideassurance.com. sales@MaraiSecurity.com, or sales@Paramify.com. Thank you to all of our speakers today for the insightful talk around CMMC. And thank you to everyone who joined the webinar. We really appreciate you guys being here. And again, this is recorded and will be live on our website. So yeah, thank you guys. You guys want to say anything?
Thanks,
I
Matt.
just wanna-
CMMC is fun.
It is fun.
There's your April Fool's joke, right, Jack?
Yeah.
Finally got to it. And that you don't
All
have
right.
brown hair. It's gray now.
All right. Thank you guys.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.